When Peaky Blinders premiered on BBC Two in September 2013, it introduced to its audience a setting and time period that is rarely used in pop culture, even in Britain. A year later, the series was picked up by Netflix and distributed across the globe, becoming an international success. Therefore, many people, both in the UK and around the world, understand interwar British society, culture and politics through the lens of the series. However, historical authenticity is not, and true never has been, a particularly important aspect of the series. In an interview with the Royal Television Society, writer and creator Stephen Knight suggests that the series was inspired by stories his father would tell him about organised crime figures in Birmingham during the 1920s. Knight stated that he wanted to depict these working class men not as figures of pity, as is often the case in mainstream British television, but as romanticised figures in the American tradition of the Western. This preference for transatlantic pop culture is made evident by Knight's comments regarding his recent project C, broadcast on Apple TV+. Knight seems interested in ensuring his work can be appreciated across the globe. However, this appeal to a global market can dilute the authenticity of the setting depicted, as is often the case with Peaky Blinders, which often eschews the reality of its setting to conflate interwar British organised crime with more glamorous, American mafia-inspired fare. The title of the series is derived from a real Birmingham street gang which was active during the turn of the 20th century. Birmingham historian Carl Chin confirmed in a 2019 interview with Birmingham Live that the Peaky Blinders were a real street gang, whose name did indeed derive from their peaked caps. However, Chin suggests that it is highly unlikely that members of the gang would have attached razor blades to their caps, as during this period razor blades were considered a luxury item and would have been too expensive for many working class people. Chin also raises the issue of periodisation, arguing that the historical Peaky Blinders were active during the 1890s, some 30 years prior to the beginning of the series. This assertion is supported by a number of contemporaneous documents, not least an article in the Birmingham Mail, dated to March 1890, that references the notoriety of the gang. The decision to set the series in the 1920s could have been taken in order to situate its characters in the aftermath of the First World War, an important part of many of the characters' backstories. The First World War did have a profound effect on Birmingham, with historian Roger Ward noting that nearly 50,000 men from Birmingham were either killed or wounded during the conflict. However, more cynically, one could argue that the 1920s were chosen in order to make the series feel more like American Prohibition gangster-era media such as Boardwalk Empire, a series it is important to note that Knight claims not to have seen. In addition to real street gangs, Peaky Blinders also incorporates real historical figures into its narrative. Often these historical figures are simply used as stock villains to be defeated by the Shelby family. This is the case with Billy Kimber, the antagonist of the first season. Chin claims that Kimber was indeed a real figure, who was a powerful and well-connected figure in interwar British organised crime. However, in the series, Kimber is quickly defeated by the Peaky Blinders, who become the dominant gang in Birmingham. Using historical figures in ways that deviate from historical record in order to further a fictitious narrative is a hallmark of lazy historical fiction, and it undermines the positive uses of historical figures that exist elsewhere in the series. For example, Peaky Blinders depicts Winston Churchill, then just a cabinet minister, as a recurring character. Churchill is frequently voted amongst the greatest Britons to ever live, chiefly as a result of his record as Prime Minister during the Second World War. However, far less attention is often paid to his domestic policies, and his depiction in Peaky Blinders is a rare instance of Churchill being portrayed not as a wartime leader in mainstream pop culture. It is often argued that Churchill's record, when divorced from the Second World War, leaves a lot to be desired, and Peaky Blinders plays with some of these criticisms. In the series, Churchill uses Northern Irish paramilitary forces in order to further the British Crown's interests and suppress the growth of socialist ideas in urban Britain. While there is no evidence for Churchill having done this during his time as Minister for Munitions, it does recall two major incidents in Churchill's early political career. During his time as Home Secretary, Churchill used the British military to suppress the miners' strike of 1910 in South Wales. A decade later, as Secretary of State for War and Air, Churchill supported the use of Northern Irish paramilitary forces during the Irish War for Independence. By incorporating underutilised elements of historical truth, Peaky Blinders shines a light on aspects of Churchill's record that are often not discussed, particularly in pop culture. In addition to organised crime, Peaky Blinders has always held an overt interest in interwar British politics. From the legacy of the First World War to the development of ethnic minority groups and the growth of fringe ideologies in urban, working-class communities, the series has introduced often under-discussed chapters in modern British political history to the general public. One very relevant aspect of Britain's modern history was incorporated into the most recent series by the introduction of Oswald Mosley. Much like Churchill, Mosley is depicted in Peaky Blinders in a way that departs from historical record but does nonetheless stay true to what we know about him from history. The series, which introduces Mosley in 1929, depicts him as a cunning anti-Semite whose newly founded New Party poses a very real threat to the British political establishment. In reality, the New Party and its successor, the British Union of Fascists, were very much a fringe entity that failed to make an impact in Westminster. This is not to say that the BUF did not have a profoundly negative impact on British public life. At its height, the BUF attracted a membership of over 40,000 people and terrorised Jewish communities in East London, culminating in the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. Mosley's inclusion in Peaky Blinders serves as a timely reminder of Britain's frequent flirtation with far-right racism during the 20th century. From Mosley's BUF to the National Front of the 1990s, there is a long and sordid tradition of fascist elements within Britain, and portraying this on a mainstream television show provides context to some of the ugly scenes witnessed in London over the summer of 2020. It is important, particularly in countries that did not fall to fascist rule during the 1930s and 40s, such as the UK and the USA, that fascism is not simply an external threat, but often an internal one. By depicting homegrown fascism so bluntly, Peaky Blinders helps prevent this lesson from being lost to history. As a result of Knight's stated interest in the development of working-class identities in urban interwar Britain, Peaky Blinders also devotes many of its subplots to the growth of the socialist movement in the UK and the emergence of the Labour Party as a credible party of government. These themes are often introduced via the character of Ada Shelby, although at the end of the 4th season of the series, the protagonist, Tommy Shelby, is elected as a Labour Party Member of Parliament. Within this subplot, Peaky Blinders often focuses on the efforts of the British establishment to suppress the growth of the domestic socialist movement. This initially focuses on the role of Winston Churchill, as discussed earlier, but in Season 3 the series introduces the Zinoviev Letter, a contentious document that is often overlooked when modern British political history is explored. The Zinoviev Letter was a fabricated document leaked to the Conservative Party by British intelligence on the eve of the 1924 general election. The letter, allegedly written by Comintern President Grigory Zinoviev, calls on factions loyal to the Soviet Union within the Labour Party to push for closer relations with the new communist state. While the letter was a forgery, it had a profound effect on the British electorate. Following its publication in the Daily Mail, incidentally a newspaper which openly supported Oswald Mosley's BUF until 1934, the Conservative Party defeated the first ever Labour government by a landslide. The truth of the Zinoviev letter was not revealed until the Labour Party commissioned a study by Gil Bennett, chief historian at the Foreign Office, in 1998. To this day, the Zinoviev letter remains a misunderstood document that nonetheless offers an insight into the opposition socialism faced in the UK, and the length certain sections of the British establishment would go to suppress its growth. It is an important lesson today, as wealth inequality continues to grow within the UK and deprivation increases across urban Britain. While Peaky Blinders may stumble on occasion when it attempts to incorporate historical events and individuals into its narrative, it shines as a visual medium that depicts a historical setting. Knight claims that he drew a lot of inspiration for the series from his father's job at a scrap merchant's yard where he shoed horses. Many of the characters from the series are facsimiles of Knight's father's colleagues from the yard, and his family's connection to the post-industrial setting is apparent from the way it is depicted in the series. Birmingham was one of the main centres of industrial development in Britain during the 19th century, with small workshops springing up across the city which were replaced by larger factories as the 20th century approached. This urban development soon brought with it migration, particularly migrants from Ireland following the Great Irish Famine of the mid-19th century. This demographic shift is well represented by the diverse cast used in the series. Peaky Blinders' Small Heath is a setting dominated by cramped, back-to-back houses, a form of terraced house that was built throughout the 19th century to accommodate booming urban populations. Martin Gaskell claims that these houses were often poorly built, with substandard drainage systems which often led to them becoming slums. This post-industrial urban squalor is beautifully realised in Peaky Blinders, its Birmingham being a bustling, suffocating city, with every other alleyway spewing smoke and detritus up into the air. This sense of authenticity is supported by the series' choice of filming location. While many historical films and television series choose to construct their own sets, much of Peaky Blinders is filmed at the Black Country Living Museum in Dudley, 10 miles from Birmingham. The museum, which has been operating for nearly 40 years, aims to offer an immersive experience that tells the story of one of the very first industrialised landscapes in Britain. By relying on a carefully constructed set, free from the pressures of big-budget television, Peaky Blinders reduces the propensity for historical clangers that so often plague period dramas, depicting settings like the scrap merchant's yard that influenced Knight in the first place with real authenticity. Whether or not Peaky Blinders succeeds as a piece of historical fiction depends entirely on the show's intent and how the viewer chooses to interpret the series. Undeniably, the series plays fast and loose with the truth, reinterpreting key events and figures to fit neatly into its story arcs. Equally, it borrows just as much from American gangster dramas as it does from British historical records. However, along the way it also imparts some crucial lessons about the development of urban Britain, the growth of working class identities, and the political machinations that informed the story of modern British politics. While some viewers may choose to accept everything they see at face value, many more will be inspired to look into the real people and events that inspired the series' plotlines. The interwar period is seldom seen in British pop culture, and Birmingham is a shockingly underutilised setting relative to its importance to the UK and its history. But when it comes to that history, Peaky Blinders very much leaves it up to the viewer to discover why the setting was so important to where we are today. I hope this video has taught you something new. If there are any questions, please leave a comment or reach out to me on Twitter. If you require further assistance regarding academic writing, history lessons or English comprehension, you can find my tutoring profiles below.